You've been sold a comforting fantasy about healing, that if you do the inner work, you become softer, more open, more endlessly available, radiating unconditional acceptance like a candle in a dark room. It sounds noble. It also keeps you controllable, because the version of healing that society praises most is the version that still benefits everyone else. Carl Jung spent his life mapping what actually happens when a sensitive person integrates the shadow. And the truth is harsher and more liberating than the mythology. A fully integrated empath doesn't become more accessible. They become immune. And immunity looks like danger to anyone who survived by exploiting your openness. Before integration, the empath lives in a state that can feel like a permanent psychic exposure. Your perception is too accurate, and your boundaries are too thin. You register what others miss. Tension before words are spoken. Hostility hiding behind politeness. The heaviness someone carries while smiling. The contradiction between what is said and what is meant. People call it intuition. They call it empathy. But for most empaths, it began as survival intelligence, a nervous system trained in an early environment where reading the room wasn't a gift, it was protection. If a parent's mood decided whether the day would be safe or volatile, you learned to detect micro shifts fast. If love was inconsistent, you learned to predict patterns. If words were unreliable, you learned to read energy, posture, tone, timing, the small involuntary signals that betray the truth. That adaptation sharpened your perception. But it came with a cost. Because while your sensitivity evolved, your boundary structure did not. You became receptive without discrimination. Jung described how the unconscious doesn't merely sit inside the individual. It participates between people, passing material through projection, suggestion, emotional contagion, shared atmosphere. And the untrained empath becomes an open system in the middle of that exchange. You walk into a room and it floods you. Not just one person's mood, but the collective emotional climate, resentment, grief, shame, unprocessed fear. You don't experience it as theirs. You experience it as mine, because you were never taught the distinction. You were taught responsibility. You were trained to stabilize. You were praised for being mature, calm, understanding, strong. What no one said out loud is that you were being shaped into a container. So you built an identity around absorption. You became the listener, the fixer, the one who could handle anything. Family therapist at 12, emotional translator at 16, human safe house at 25. You learned to hold people together while you quietly dissolved. You said yes when your body begged for no. You stayed when your instincts begged for distance. You smiled through exhaustion because you confused endurance with virtue. And because boundaries felt like rejection, limits felt like abandonment, and asserting yourself felt like danger. You didn't just fear conflict. You feared the consequences of having needs. Over time, something subtle and devastating happens. When your attention is trained outward for years, you lose contact with your internal reality. You can read everyone except yourself. You can name other people's emotions with precision, but yours arrive as fog, fatigue, irritability, numbness. You become a sophisticated psychological instrument pointed outward with no internal calibration. This is why so many sensitive people don't present as traditionally ill, but they are exhausted, anxious, confused, chronically depleted. They aren't drowning in their own psyche. They're drowning in borrowed material. They've been carrying other people's denied aggression, repressed grief, unowned shame, and calling it compassion. Jung's brutal clarity is that healing is not becoming nicer. Healing is becoming whole, and wholeness requires the shadow, not the shadow as a fashionable concept, but the shadow as the disowned parts of your nature you labeled unacceptable. Your anger, your refusal, your capacity to sever, your cold discernment, your ability to disappoint people without collapsing. If you're an empath, there's a specific shadow pattern that keeps you trapped. You disowned self-protection and renamed it selfishness. You disowned no and renamed it cruelty. You disowned distance and renamed it betrayal. You disowned judgment and renamed it toxicity. And because you disowned those functions, you became predictable to anyone who operates through guilt, neediness, coercion, or charm. That's why individuation for the empath is rarely chosen casually. It's usually forced by a crisis that breaks the old operating system, and it often arrives as betrayal, not everyday disappointment, not a minor wound, a revelation. The person you protected most, the person you gave the benefit of the doubt to over and over, the person you absorbed pain for, explained away, excused, carried. And then you see it clearly. They were using your empathy as a resource. They didn't relate to you as a person. They related to you as a function, a regulator, a mirror, a rescue supply. And once you see that, you cannot unsee it. This moment matters because it forces a choice that can no longer be postponed. You can continue the old ritual, reinterpret what you know, minimize, spiritualize, understand, keep absorbing to preserve the connection. Or you can do the thing your soul has begged for all along. Trust your perception and stop abandoning yourself to protect other people from consequences. Jung would call this an encounter with the shadow. For the empath, it is more precise. It is the moment you reclaim your denied aggression, not aggression as violence, but aggression as life force, as the power to assert, to cut through, to separate, to defend the integrity of your inner world. Integration is not a gentle upgrade. It's a hard moral awakening. You realize something humiliating and freeing, that every time you overrode your instincts to preserve someone else's comfort, you committed an act of self-violence. Not dramatic violence, quiet violence, the kind that looks like politeness, the kind that gets rewarded, the kind that slowly kills your life. And the breaking point is not when you finally forgive. The breaking point is when you stop committing that violence. When you look at manipulation and feel no urge to fix the manipulator. When you feel no need to argue your reality into existence. When you feel no obligation to take responsibility for emotions that aren't yours. After that point, you don't become softer. You become sharper, not bitter, not hostile, precise. Your system stops leaking. Your empathy stops being a public utility. And this is the moment people misunderstand as coldness. They say you've changed. They say you're not as loving. What they mean is, you're not as available to be used. The first shift is the cessation of absorption. It sounds simple, but it's a total rewiring. You develop differentiation, the ability to observe emotional content without internalizing it. Someone projects anger at you. The old you absorbed it, questioned yourself, tried to repair, tried to keep peace. The integrated, you watches the mechanism in real time. You see the projection forming, and you don't accept delivery. The emotion doesn't enter your system. It bounces back to its owner. And this is where the danger begins, because most people rely on unconscious offloading to survive. They cannot tolerate holding what they feel. They need someone else to carry it. When you stop carrying it, they escalate, they accuse you, they provoke, they push harder. But the more conscious you become, the less their intensity can move you. Not because you are numb, because you are sovereign. This single change collapses guilt manipulation. The moment someone tries to make you responsible for their emotional state, and you simply refuse the assignment, the entire strategy fails. They're holding guilt with nowhere to place it. They're holding shame with nowhere to dump it. And you're watching it happen without being hooked. That's not cruelty. That's accountability returning to its rightful owner. The second shift is selectivity, and it disturbs people who believed your sensitivity meant universal access. The healed empath becomes aggressively selective with intimacy, not selective in a fearful, closed-off way, but selective in a strategic, self-respecting way. You are still capable of profound presence, deep compassion, and real connection. But those capacities become earned. They are reserved for people who demonstrate reciprocal consciousness, people who do their own work, who respect boundaries without testing them, who can hold discomfort without outsourcing it, who don't punish you for having a self. For everyone else, you become unavailable, not reactive, not dramatic, simply inaccessible. You stop explaining, you stop defending, you stop negotiating your limits into something others can tolerate. You just operate from them. This is where the distinction between nice and kind becomes real. Nice is conflict avoidance. Kind is clarity. Nice enables dysfunction because it fears discomfort. Kind allows discomfort because it respects reality. The integrated empath stops being nice. They become kind in ways that feel severe to people addicted to being accommodated. Kind enough to let others face consequences. Kind enough to refuse enabling. Kind enough to say no without apology. Kind enough to end relationships that exist only through your self-abandonment. The third shift is what most people cannot handle once it's fully online. Your perception becomes predictive, and you trust it. Think about what you've been doing your whole life. Every time you read a room, you logged data. Every time you absorbed someone's state, you studied patterns. Every time you sensed intent before action, you built a model. The unhealed empath collected this intelligence, but felt guilty about using it. You told yourself you were overthinking. You called your perception judgment. You demanded proof before you trusted yourself. You allowed people to convince you your reality was wrong because you were terrified of being unfair. Integration ends that self-betrayal. You don't need external validation to trust what your whole system is reading. When deception is present, you feel it and you act accordingly. This is why a healed empath becomes operationally dangerous to manipulators. You see the game before it starts. You recognize the setup, the bait, the future request being staged. You see obligation forming in advance. You hear the false vulnerability designed to hook your rescue reflex. You detect the subtle testing of boundaries, and you don't argue with it. You don't investigate for months. You don't wait for the final betrayal to give yourself permission. You simply step out of the pattern, quietly, cleanly, early. And here's the most important ethical line Jung's work implies. The integrated empath could weaponize this perception. If you understand manipulation, you also understand leverage. You can see exactly where people are wounded, what they crave, what scares them, what story controls them. You could exploit that. You could dominate rooms. You could control outcomes. But integration includes conscience, not performative morality, but internal law. You choose protection, not domination. You choose precision without cruelty. You choose boundaries without revenge. That choice is what turns power into integrity. When this transformation happens, it doesn't stay confined inside you. Systems around you begin to reorganize. Because your old role was structural, you were the absorber of tension, the smoother of conflict, the translator of chaos, the one who kept dysfunction from collapsing under its own weight. Once you stop performing that function, the system loses its stabilizer. Family dynamics built on denial cannot remain comfortable. Relationships built on your overfunctioning cannot survive unchanged. People who relied on your guilt will panic. They will create narratives where you are the problem, because if you are the problem, they don't have to face themselves. This is where your real sovereignty shows. You don't defend. You don't debate. You don't explain your boundary as if it needs approval. You observe. You watch who respects your evolution and who is threatened by it. You let reactions reveal truth. And you make decisions based on what is real, not on what is hoped for. No more falling in love with potential. No more staying because they had a hard life. No more sacrificing yourself to keep false peace alive. You engage with reality as it exists. What emerges on the other side is not innocence. It's individuation. A self that has descended into its own darkness, reclaimed what it disowned, and returned with a wider range of power than most people ever develop. You can be gentle or severe, depending on what the moment requires. You can love deeply without losing yourself. You can feel everything without surrendering your center. Your empathy becomes conscious sensitivity, not uncontrolled absorption. Your compassion becomes strategic, not compulsive. Your presence becomes a gift, not a service. This is why the healed empath becomes dangerous. Not because they attack, because they cannot be moved by the old tools. You can't guilt trip them into compliance. You can't confuse them with emotional noise. You can't bait them into rescuing you. You can't hook them with pity. You can't control them through withdrawal. The manipulation hits empty space because they're no longer standing in the target zone. They're not hiding. They're simply operating from a level where unconsciousness can't reach. And the final inversion is this: protecting your peace is not selfish. It is sanity. Walking away from toxicity is not weakness. It is self-respect. Choosing yourself is not cruelty. It is the foundation of every honest relationship you will ever build. The unintegrated empath believed their destiny was to save everyone. The integrated empath understands the truth. You were never meant to be consumed. You were meant to become whole. And once you become whole, your empathy stops being your wound and becomes your instrument. Not the ability to feel everything, but the wisdom to choose what deserves to be felt. Not endless patience, but the strength to leave when patience becomes self-abandonment. Not open access, but clean boundaries that protect the sacred center of your life. Healing doesn't make you softer for the world. It makes you truer to yourself. It doesn't make you more accommodating. It makes you precise. And that precision is what breaks the cycles that once owned you. You don't argue. You don't prove. You don't perform your goodness. You simply see the pattern make the assessment, and act. Usually, by leaving so quietly, they barely notice you're gone until they realize the old supply, the old stabilizer, the old absorber is no longer available. No drama, no explanation, just absence. And for many people, that absence is the first time they're forced to face themselves. That is what a healed empath becomes. Sovereign, self-possessed, unshakable in knowing, immovable in boundaries, compassionate with discernment, loving with integrity, operationally untouchable to anyone who mistakes awareness for availability.